My name is Emma Rodriguez, and for the longest time, I believed my life was exactly as I had always dreamed. Every morning began inside my Brooklyn studio, a modest space perched above a noisy street, yet somehow always filled with light. The sun filtered through tall windows, warming the stacks of colorful fabric that lined the walls. Rolls of silk shimmered like liquid gems. Bolts of cotton carried the faint scent of laundry soap, and velvets in deep burgundy seemed to absorb the morning shadows. The steady hum of sewing machines blended with the rhythmic snip of scissors, creating a kind of music that only I seemed to hear. Clients leaned in close to mirrors, turning this way and that, their laughter bright and genuine as they admired gowns I had stitched by hand. When their eyes lit up, when a soft gasp slipped past their lips, as if they couldn't believe the reflection was really them, that was the moment I lived for. I used to joke that the studio itself had a heartbeat. Each sound, from the tap of my pen sketching a new design to the sharp pull of a zipper closing, felt alive. My fingertips were often raw from long nights spent sewing, but it was a pain I cherished, a reminder that I was building something real. To me, this was success. Not wealth, not luxury, but the chance to take scraps of fabric and turn them into something that made people feel beautiful. Yet outside that creative whirlwind, my personal life was what truly made it feel perfect. Alex, my fiancé, was the kind of man who drew stares without trying. He had a calm confidence that lingered in the way he leaned against a doorway or rested his hand lightly on the small of my back. In a city of millions, he made me feel chosen. I can still see him at the Italian restaurant the night he proposed. The space was warm and dimly lit, walls lined with shelves of wine bottles that gleamed under soft golden lights. A violinist played faintly in the background, and the air carried the fragrance of garlic and rosemary. My cheeks flushed as he slid a velvet box across the table, the candle flame dancing in his eyes. My breath caught when he whispered, "Emma, spend forever with me." The sound of champagne glasses clinking from the table beside us, the way the waiter smiled knowingly as if he'd seen this moment countless times, all of it blurred into a haze of light and warmth. I remember laughing nervously, covering my mouth with my hand before nodding yes. He kissed me softly then, the kind of kiss that makes the rest of the world fade to silence. And of course, there was Luis, my brother, my first protector, my occasional tormentor when we were kids. He never let me forget how artsy I was, how impractical my dreams had seemed compared to his sharp instincts for business. But now, he boasted to anyone who would listen that his sister was a rising designer in Brooklyn. It made me proud, even if he sometimes exaggerated my success. Family dinners with Luis and Alex were loud, messy, and filled with love. The kitchen steamed with the smell of tacos and sizzling carne asada, cumin and lime tangling in the air until my eyes watered. Luis was always first to snatch a tortilla, dripping salsa across the napkins I had been doodling sketches on. His booming laugh shook the walls, and Alex's smoother, lower chuckle followed close behind. I used to sit there with my sketch pad half hidden under the table, half listening, half lost in my designs, and all the while feeling wrapped in warmth. Luis would dive into stories of his latest investments, the kinds of deals that sounded almost mythical, stocks that would double overnight, real estate projects in neighborhoods I'd never heard of, or some app he swore would revolutionize everything. I didn't always follow the details, but I loved the fire in his eyes. "Just till my commission hits, Em," he would whisper with a wink, leaning close as if letting me in on a secret. "Promise. Family's got your back, right?" It was impossible to say no. He was my brother. If he needed me, of course I'd help. That was the unspoken rule we'd lived by since childhood. Alex often joined in, his arm sliding easily around my shoulders. "You're amazing with fabrics, babe, but leave the numbers to us pros." He said it with a grin, a playful nudge, and Luis laughed so hard he nearly spilled his beer. I laughed too, because that's what you do when the people you love tease you. But inside, a quiet knot tightened in my stomach. Their words were wrapped in affection, but the edges felt sharp, as though admiration and dismissal were tangled together. Even now, I can picture that flickering kitchen light, casting uneven shadows across the walls as they talked. The room was alive with noise. Luis pounding the table for emphasis, Alex's calm voice weaving in facts and figures, the sizzle of meat still cooking on the stove. My own voice was softer, my laughter lighter, as if I was simply there to play the role of listener, supporter, dreamer. To anyone else, it looked like perfection. To me, it felt almost perfect. Almost. Because when the laughter faded and I lay in bed hours later, the smell of grilled onions still clinging to my hair, questions whispered in the quiet. Why did their compliments feel like a veil stretched too thin? Why, when Alex called me a creative dreamer, did it sound more like a boundary than a blessing? I wanted to dismiss the unease. I told myself it was nothing, just fatigue or paranoia. After all, wasn't this everything I had always wanted? A buzzing studio, clients who adored my work, a brother who boasted about me, a fiancé who promised me forever. It was perfect. It had to be perfect. And yet, when they spoke about money, when Luis leaned too close, when Alex smirked as if I were naive, it felt like a thread inside me was being pulled too tight, a thread no one else could see. Threads like that don't break immediately. They hold and hold until one day, with just the slightest tug, they snap. This is the life I've always dreamed of. I whispered to myself in the darkness, listening to the low hum of the city outside my window. But even as I said it, another voice echoed back inside me. Why does something feel off when they talk about money? I never answered that question. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The dinners became a pattern. What used to feel like chaotic family warmth, plates clattering, the smell of tacos filling the air, Luis telling jokes too loudly, started to take on another rhythm. The table was still crowded with food, sizzling pans of carne asada, bowls of guacamole, tortillas stacked so high they leaned against each other. But over time, the conversation shifted. They were no longer just about memories or teasing or laughter. Instead, the focus turned to opportunities. Luis leaned across the table one evening, his sleeves rolled up, a half-empty beer bottle sweating in his hand. "This one's a sure win," he said, his eyes gleaming the way they did whenever he smelled money in the air. "A friend of mine is buying into a development project. Downtown condos, prime location. If we get in early, the returns will be insane." He paused, locking eyes with me like he was letting me in on a secret no one else deserved to know. I stirred the beans absent-mindedly, the spoon scraping the edge of the pot, while my iPad sat on the counter beside me with half-finished sketches glowing faintly. My fingers itched to draw, but I forced myself to stay present, nodding as though I fully understood his talk of capital gains and projections. "Just till my commission hits, Em. Promise," Luis said with a grin, reaching for a taco and dripping salsa across the napkin where I had absent-mindedly drawn the outline of a gown. "You know family always pays back." Alex laughed, leaning back in his chair, his arms stretched casually along the back of mine. "You've got a gift with fabrics, babe. No one can deny that. But leave the business side to us. Trust me, I've seen numbers like these before. It's bulletproof." I smiled, but something in my chest tightened. I looked at my sketch, the lines shaky, the figure incomplete, the pen mark smeared by a drop of salsa. My hand traced the corner of the napkin, restless, tapping against it as if I could stitch my unease into something neat and hidden. The room was warm, maybe too warm. Steam rose from the skillet, fogging the kitchen window where the city's orange streetlights glowed faintly beyond the glass. Shadows stretched long across the table, flickering each time the overhead light buzzed. Their voices rose and fell like waves, Luis throwing out words like equity and guaranteed returns, Alex countering with smart positioning and timing the market. I nodded along, forcing my smile to stay in place, telling myself this was just how they showed care. They were looking out for me, weren't they? They didn't mean to make me feel small. When Alex said, "You focus on the pretty stuff. We've got the business side covered," he wasn't trying to diminish me, was he? It was just his way of saying I didn't need to carry the burden. That's what I told myself anyway. Still, the words lingered. Heavy. Pretty stuff. Business side. Why did it sound like there were two worlds? Mine, light and colorful and delicate, and theirs, serious and unshakable. And why did I always feel like I was being guided, gently but firmly, toward the idea that my world wasn't enough? Luis leaned in again, lowering his voice, his smile coaxing, almost childlike despite the wrinkles forming at the corners of his eyes. "Come on, sis. You've always had my back. Just a little loan, nothing huge. You won't even notice it's gone." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is," he replied quickly, almost too quickly. Alex added, "Babe, you know we'd never steer you wrong. Family, right? And I know numbers like the back of my hand." "You can trust us." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. The warmth of the kitchen, the smell of grilled onions and lime, the sight of my brother relaxed in his chair and my fiancé's hand resting comfortably on mine. It all painted a picture of safety, of loyalty. Why question it? And yet, as I turned my iPad back on, the glow illuminating my half-finished sketch, I caught myself scribbling shapes that had no meaning. Circles, lines crossing over one another, restless doodles that betrayed the tension I refused to voice. My foot tapped under the table, my pencil moved in shaky strokes, and though my face was angled in their direction, my thoughts were far away. "They're just looking out for me. Why question family?" I whispered to myself later that night as I cleaned the dishes. The water ran hot, steam curling upward as I stared at the soap bubbles slipping down the plates, but my reflection in the kitchen window looked uncertain, my smile faint and strained. I told myself I was imagining it, that the laughter at dinner, the way Alex brushed his lips against my temple before leaving the table, the way Luis called me the heart of the family, that was what mattered, not the unease. Not the nagging thought that maybe their praise was less about admiration and more about control. But those questions didn't go away. They hung in the air like the faint smell of smoke after a candle has been blown out, barely noticeable, easy to ignore, but impossible to fully erase. So I pushed them aside, one by one, convincing myself it was just love, just family, just care. That's what trust meant, wasn't it? Believing even when the evidence felt thin. And yet, as I lay in bed that night, sketching absent-mindedly on my iPad, I realized the lines I drew were jagged, tense. The sketches weren't gowns anymore. They were just restless shapes, frantic strokes, like my hand was trying to warn me about something my heart refused to face. The questions remained unanswered, and the longer I ignored them, the heavier they became. The day began like any other, with the low hum of sewing machines filling my Brooklyn studio. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching on sequins scattered across the floor, making the whole room shimmer as if it were holding its breath. I was bent over a mannequin, sliding pins through the waist of a dress, when the studio door burst open so hard it rattled against the wall. Alex stormed in, his tie loosened, his cheeks flushed from the cold air outside. He was carrying his laptop like it contained the answer to everything. "Em, you won't believe this," he said, his voice vibrating with the kind of urgency that made my pulse quicken. Without waiting, He swept aside fabric swatches and set the laptop right on top of my sketches. The screen lit up with flashing graphics, digital models strutting in gowns that shifted colors mid-stride, shimmering fabrics coded to mimic silk but generated with algorithms, sleek slides showing bold phrases, AI, fashion, innovation, the future. Before I could even ask what this was, Luis's face appeared on the screen. He was calling in from his office, his grin wide, his voice booming through the speakers as if he owned the room. "Finally, sis. This is the kind of opportunity that changes lives. We've got the tech, the timing, the contacts. All we need is you." I froze, my hand still pressed against the mannequin's frame. The images flickered like neon promises, and for a moment I could see myself in them. My designs, my creativity, my name woven into something grander than I had ever imagined. My chest tightened with awe and disbelief. Could this really be possible? Could my little Brooklyn studio suddenly stretch into the future like this? Alex slid behind me, his arm brushing mine as he pointed to the graphs glowing on the screen. Projected profits in the millions within a year, investors already circling. But if we act now, we won't just be part of it. We'll own it. He leaned closer, his voice dropping low, persuasive. "Emma, this isn't just us. This is you." Luis jumped in before I could process the words. "Put in everything, Em. This is our shot. Don't hold back. Family sticks together. You trust us, right?" The weight of his words pressed hard against me. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Pride swelled beneath the fear. Pride that they wanted me in, that they saw me as central to something big. For a split second, I pictured my name lit up on screens across the world, my gowns tied to a company leading the next era of fashion. Still, doubt whispered. "Are you sure it's solid?" I asked, my voice small, caught between hope and hesitation. Alex's smile didn't waver, his gaze locked on mine, steady, unwavering. "It's solid. Trust us on this." I looked at Luis's face on the screen, his grin unshakable, and then back at Alex, who was watching me like the answer had already been written. My hand trembled slightly as Alex slid the documents across the table. I picked up the pen. The sound of its tip scratching across paper was sharper than I expected, almost echoing in my ears, like it was cutting into more than just the page. "There," Alex said quietly, almost like he was sealing a promise. "We're in." The studio seemed to hum with new energy after that. The sewing machines, the stacks of fabric, even the faint honk of a horn from the street outside, all of it felt louder, brighter, alive with possibility. I told myself this was it, the beginning of something great. The unease, the hesitation, those were nothing but nerves. That night, long after the adrenaline had faded, I stayed behind to tidy up. The studio smelled faintly of fabric dye and the coffee I had spilled earlier in the rush. Papers lay scattered across my desk. Alex's charts, Luis's emailed slides, my own sketches shoved to the side. I wanted to reclaim the space, to make it mine again. As I lifted a stack of old drawings from a shelf, something thin and yellowed slipped out and fluttered to the floor. An envelope. My heart skipped as I bent down. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. His voice came back to me through those lines, steady but heavy. "Luis hides more than he admits. Trust is a dangerous currency. Be careful, Emma." The room suddenly felt colder. The soft hum of the machines was gone. Even the street noises outside seemed distant, muffled. I read the words again and again, my fingers tightening on the fragile paper. What did he mean? What was Luis hiding? For a heartbeat, I saw Luis's face earlier on the screen, his grin just a little too wide, his voice just a little too insistent. I thought of how Alex had slid the documents toward me so quickly, barely leaving me space to breathe. My chest tightened with a ripple of unease so sharp it felt like a warning, but then I shook my head. Dad had been sick toward the end. His mind had wandered. Maybe he had been confused, paranoid. Luis was my brother. Alex was the man I loved. They wouldn't lead me astray. I folded the letter back into the envelope and tucked it beneath the stack of papers, pressing it down as though the weight of everything else could smother its warning. This could change everything. Family first, right? I whispered to myself, hoping the words sounded stronger out loud than they felt inside. I told myself it didn't matter, that the future was waiting, bright, unstoppable, full of promise. But as I turned off the lights and stepped out of the studio, locking the door behind me, the letter's words clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. It began with a flicker on my screen. At first, I thought it was the Wi-Fi, another glitch in my small Brooklyn studio. I refreshed the page once, twice, then again, faster each time. But the website that had promised a dazzling future, our future, was gone. A white screen, an error code, nothing else. I told myself not to panic. Servers crash, pages go down. But when I tried calling Alex, my fiancé, the call went straight to voicemail. Luis, too. My brother, my blood. Same thing. No answer. My chest tightened, my heart pounding against my ribs. I opened my email, searching frantically through threads that had been full of documents, projections, contracts, just days ago. Empty. Attachments missing. Charts deleted. It was as if someone had scrubbed away every trace of what I had believed in. My hands shook so hard I could barely control the mouse. No, 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 I whispered, slamming the laptop shut. The sound echoed in the quiet studio, louder than it should have been. I knocked over a stack of fabric bolts, the silk spilling across the floor in waves of color that mocked me with their beauty. My sketches fluttered down with the mess, fragile lines buried beneath papers that had meant nothing. I tried calling again. Again. Each time, the voicemail tone stabbed into me, the silence on the other end heavier than words. The more I dialed, the colder the room became. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to breathe, but the air itself felt suffocating. Hours later, when fear had dulled into a sick kind of determination, I went to find Alex. He would explain. He had to. His apartment door creaked open under my hand. The smell hit me first. Dust, cardboard, the faint tang of stale sweat. The space was dim, lit only by one crooked lamp in the corner. Boxes were stacked everywhere, half sealed with tape, clothes thrown carelessly into open suitcases. The television reflected the dull light, blank and cold. Alex was crouched near the couch, stuffing papers into a folder. He looked up, startled for a fraction of a second, then his face hardened. He zipped the folder shut like he was cutting me out of it. Alex. My voice cracked. The website's gone, the money. Where's Luis? What's happening? He didn't look at me. His hands kept moving, folding shirts, pushing them into the bag. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stepped forward, my breath shallow, my pulse screaming in my ears. Harder? I put in everything. My savings, my trust, my name. Tell me the truth. Finally, he stopped. He turned to face me, and when his eyes met mine, they weren't the eyes of the man who once slid a velvet box across a candlelit table. They were cold, flat, almost bored. You were always too naive for this world, Em, he said, his voice calm, almost casual. Love made you blind, but that's on you, not us. The words cut sharper than any blade. Too naive. Blind. Not us. Me. My knees trembled, but I forced myself to stand. So, it was all a lie? The startup, the promises, the future we talked about, every single word? He shrugged, his indifference more brutal than anger could ever be. You're good with fabrics, Emma. No one denies that. But money, business, that's not you. You were just useful. For a while. Useful. The word twisted inside me, sour and bitter. The man who once kissed me like I was his world now reduced me to a tool, nothing more. I swallowed hard, my voice breaking. And Luis, my brother, what did he do? Alex smirked faintly, the corner of his mouth curling in contempt. He closed another box with a sharp rip of packing tape. Luis saw what you never could, that your trust was wide open, that you'd never question him. None of this would have worked without him. The room spun. My brother. The one who said, "Family's got your back." The one who laughed at the dinner table, borrowing money with promises of big breaks. My own blood had carved me open and handed me to Alex. How could they do this to me? I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. My throat burned, my chest hollow. How could my own blood betray me? Alex didn't answer. He turned away, humming faintly as if my pain was nothing more than background noise. I stumbled back, my hand grazing the edge of a half-packed box. The cardboard scratched against my skin, grounding me in a reality I didn't want. The sound of tape tearing through silence sliced straight through me. My chest ached as though something had splintered inside, a weight pressing down that I couldn't fight. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Nothing I said would matter. I turned, my footsteps echoing in the hallway as I left. The door closed behind me with a hollow thud that seemed to reverberate through my bones. Outside, the night swallowed me whole. The air smelled of gasoline and rain-soaked pavement. Streetlights flickered above, casting weak yellow halos onto cracked sidewalks. The city that once buzzed with life now felt hostile, cold, indifferent. I walked past windows glowing with warmth, families laughing inside, couples brushing shoulders and whispering secrets. Each glimpse was another knife in my chest, a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. By the time I reached the end of the block, the truth had settled like lead in my stomach. My savings were gone, my reputation in ruins. My fiancé had discarded me, and my own brother had turned me into prey. I had nothing left, not even the comfort of understanding why. The silence of betrayal is louder than any scream, and in that silence, as I stood under a buzzing streetlight, one thought repeated in my mind like a curse I couldn't escape. I had trusted the people who destroyed me. Rock bottom didn't arrive with a bang. It crept in quietly, until one day I realized the life I had built was gone, and all I had left was my old Toyota. The car became my world. The cracked leather seats stuck to my skin on humid nights, while the chill of winter seeped through the thin glass when the temperature dropped. The smell of stale burgers lingered no matter how many times I tried to air it out. Grease soaked into the upholstery, a reminder of dinners eaten half-heartedly in parking lots. Crumpled wrappers, empty bottles, and coins scattered across the floor told the story of survival. At night, I curled into the back seat, pulling a blanket that barely reached my toes. I would count the coins in my hand, quarters, dimes, nickels, calculating whether I could manage gas for the next day or buy a small sandwich. Usually, gas won. I needed mobility, the ability to park in a different corner of a Target lot, far enough from the entrance that no one looked too closely. The nights were the worst. Sometimes I woke to the rattle of carts, metal clanging against metal as late workers gathered them in rows. Sometimes it was the heavy footsteps of security guards, their flashlights slicing through the dark, pausing just long enough to remind me I didn't belong. Other nights, it was only silence, broken by the distant hum of the city, reminding me of a life that kept moving forward while I was stuck. Showers became something I borrowed. I slipped into cheap gyms, clutching a towel and shampoo in a small plastic bag. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, casting everything in an unforgiving glow. I scrubbed quickly, the smell of chlorine and mildew filling my lungs. In the locker rooms, I kept my head down, folding my clothes into a single worn duffel bag, hoping no one noticed how little I carried. I prayed that the water would wash away more than sweat, that it could rinse off the shame. Daytime was for Starbucks. I carried my laptop like a lifeline, even though the screen had begun to dim at the edges. I bought the cheapest black coffee on the menu and sat in a corner, pretending to belong among the students tapping away at essays and the freelancers with their tidy planners. The hum of grinders, the hiss of steaming milk, and the low chatter became a soundtrack to my own silent panic. I searched for freelance gigs, logo edits, website banners, anything. Sometimes I got lucky, landing small projects that paid just enough to cover food for a few days, but it was never steady, never enough to climb out of the hole I was in. And then the whispers began. She's had a breakdown, unreliable. Didn't she lose everything to some scam? Poor thing, but I wouldn't risk hiring her. I overheard them at coffee shops, saw them in text threads I wasn't meant to read, felt them in the sudden silence when my name came up. My reputation had bled out into the world, twisted into pity and dismissal. My name, once tied to creativity and resilience, now carried the stink of failure. One night, rummaging through the glove compartment for loose change, my fingers brushed against something unexpected, soft, crinkled paper. I pulled it out and froze. A small stack of old family photos, edges curled and faded from time. I stared at the first one. Me and Luis as kids, cotton candy melting between our fingers at a summer fair, both of us laughing like the world was nothing but possibility. Another photo slipped free. Alex at the Italian restaurant, candlelight flickering on his face, his hand holding mine, the night he promised forever. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. The photos blurred through tears, the faces warping into strangers. My fingers shook, dampening the edges with sweat and salt water. I shoved them back into the compartment, but I couldn't shove them out of my mind. Every detail around me became a weapon. The burger smell in the car pulled me back to family dinners, Luis's booming laugh over tacos, Alex's arm casually slung around my shoulder. What used to be warmth now burned like acid. The car felt smaller every day, the air heavier, the walls closing in until I could hardly move without bumping into the reality of my collapse. Even the faint creak of the steering wheel when I shifted my seat, or the buzz of a flickering streetlight outside, scraped against my nerves until I thought I'd shatter. At night, lying under my thin blanket, I whispered to the dark, "Is this all that's left? Scraps and shadows?" Sometimes I tried to convince myself this was temporary, that I'd rise again. But as the days dragged on, hope became something I couldn't afford, just like the meals I skipped or the showers I rushed through. I was slipping further, sinking into isolation so deep I felt invisible. Friends stopped calling, family had already turned their backs, and the world outside kept spinning without me. That night, as I pulled the blanket tighter and pressed my forehead against the fogged car window, watching droplets of rain snake down the glass, I realized a truth that made my stomach hollow. This was the bottom. I had never been more alone, and I didn't know if I had the strength to climb back out. The cafe was alive with the chatter of strangers, but for me, it felt like a hiding place. Midtown was crowded as always, horns blaring outside, the sidewalks slick with a thin drizzle that smeared neon reflections across the pavement. I huddled in the corner of the cafe, my clothes wrinkled, my hair damp, nursing a cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. The chipped mug warmed my hands, but it couldn't cut through the chill that had settled inside me. I stared into the dark liquid, trying not to think about the car where I had slept the night before, or the ache in my back from curling on the seat. The room smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon syrup, and the hiss of steaming milk punctuated the constant hum of voices. For a moment, I almost blended in. Almost. Then I heard it. My name, spoken softly but clearly. "Emma?" I flinched, looking up. Standing beside my table was a woman in a tailored camel coat, her hair pinned back in a sleek twist. Her eyes, sharp, assessing, softened when they met mine. Sophia! The word left my lips before I could stop it. She smiled faintly, pulling out a chair before I could refuse. Months ago, I had freelanced small design edits for one of her clients. She was polished, confident, the kind of woman who belonged in glossy magazines. And here she was, sitting across from me, while I tried to shrink inside my thrift store sweater. "You look different," she said, careful with her words. I gave a hollow laugh. Different's one way to put it. Her gaze lingered on me, not with pity, but with curiosity. "I've heard things," she said gently, "but not from you. Tell me." For a second, I wanted to bolt. What was the point? How could she understand the way betrayal rotted you from the inside, how it felt to lose not just money, but trust, family, even the right to feel safe in your own skin? But her tone was steady, patient. She wasn't going to look away. So I told her. The words stumbled out. Alex, the promises, Luis, the lies, the vanished startup, the nights in a Target parking lot. My voice cracked when I described losing the studio, once bright with fabrics and laughter, now just an echo in my memory. Through it all, Sophia didn't interrupt. She folded her hands on the table, her eyes fixed on me, absorbing every word. No judgment, no disbelief, just a silence that made it possible to keep speaking until there was nothing left. When I stopped, the quiet between us was heavy. My chest rose and fell with shaky breaths, and I braced myself for polite dismissal. Instead, Sophia leaned closer. "Emma, your talent deserves better than this." The certainty in her voice startled me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I've admired your work since the first sketches you sent me," she said. "Resilience shows in every line. I'm building something new, a brand, and I need a creative director, someone who understands fashion not just as aesthetics, but as survival. That's you." I blinked, stunned. A job? A role like that? For me? My instinct was to laugh, to reject it outright. "Look at me," I whispered. "I'm living out of a car. My name is ruined in the industry. People say I've lost it." Her lips curved into a subtle smile. "Names can be rebuilt. Talent can't be faked. You still have yours." Her words cut through the fog I'd been drowning in. Could it be true? Could I claw my way back? I felt something stir inside me, fragile and trembling, a spark of hope. We talked, sketching vague outlines of possibilities. For the first time in months, I straightened my shoulders. The warmth in her tone, the way she believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself, it chipped away at the shell of despair I had built. But then Sophia lowered her voice. "There's something else you need to know. Your father's will. It wasn't as clear as everyone thought. Luis may have hidden parts of it, assets, instructions, things meant for you." Her words struck like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading across every thought. My father's letter came back to me, the one I had buried under sketches weeks ago. Luis hides more than he admits. I had brushed it off as illness, paranoia. But now? My pulse raced. Before I could respond, a prickle crawled up the back of my neck. My eyes drifted toward the cafe window. Across the street, under the dripping edge of an awning, stood a man. He wasn't drinking coffee or checking his phone. He wasn't moving at all. He was just watching. My breath caught. His gaze was locked on me, unwavering. "Emma?" Sophia's voice pulled me back. I forced myself to look at her, my hands tightening around the mug until it burned my palms. "There's someone outside," I whispered. She turned casually, but when she looked, he was gone. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe paranoia. But the way his eyes had followed me made my stomach twist. I stared back into the swirl of coffee, trying to ground myself. A lifeline had been offered, a job, a chance, maybe even justice. And yet, already shadows gathered at the edges, reminding me that nothing was safe. Sophia reached across the table, touching my hand lightly. Take the job, Emma. You've already survived the worst. Let's build something from it. Her touch was steady, but my eyes kept flicking to the window, half expecting to see the watcher return. When I finally stepped out of the cafe, the drizzle had thickened into rain. My coat clung to me as I walked, Sophia's business card pressed tightly in my pocket. The city lights blurred through water on the pavement, red and gold streaks twisting in the dark. Hope walked with me that night. But so did dread. A lifeline. But what was with that man watching? Sophia's office in Soho looked like a temple for ideas. The tall windows framed the city's glow, rain streaks catching the light from neon signs outside. Inside, the air smelled of bergamot candles and fresh paper, the low hum of the heater pushing back the damp chill. Mood boards lined the walls, plastered with fabrics, pinned notes and taped sketches. Screens glowed with designs in motion, dresses spinning on digital mannequins, their shadows rippling across the polished hardwood. I sat stiffly at the long table, the folder in front of me feeling heavier than stone. I opened it again, though I had already seen every page a dozen times. My dresses, my exact lines, my stitching details, my signature silhouettes, displayed proudly but under someone else's name, Louise's, and tied to Alex's brand. My throat burned as if I'd swallowed glass. To lose money was one thing. To lose the very essence of my work, my art, was a theft of self. Sophia leaned forward, tapping the screen with a perfectly manicured nail. This isn't coincidence. It's theft, Emma. Plain and simple. Her voice was flint. It cut through the fog in my head. The lawyer sitting beside her adjusted his glasses, scrolling through the digital timeline we had built. Files, email trails, timestamps. His voice was calm, clinical. We've got them. Strategic justice. With this evidence, their case collapses. The timing is everything. If you reveal this at Fashion Week with cameras rolling and the industry watching, they can't bury it. It'll destroy their credibility. The words sank into me, slowly like ink seeping into cloth. Fashion Week. I could see it. The glaring lights, the runways polished like mirrors, the press with pens poised, waiting to crown the next star. The same stage Louis and Alex had stolen from me. Could I stand there? Not as their victim, but as the one who exposed them? My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I thought of the nights curled in the back seat of my Toyota, the whispers branding me unreliable, the taste of cold coffee masking hunger, and my father's letter, his warning. Louis hides more than he admits. I straightened in my chair, the folder open before me like a weapon. Then Fashion Week is where I'll take them down. Sophia's mouth curved into a thin, fierce smile. Good. We'll make sure you're armed with everything. The evidence, the press, the legal support. They won't see you coming. The lawyer nodded. Once the designs are traced back to your original files, their defense won't hold. You'll have the industry on your side. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Power. Fragile. Trembling. But real. We spent hours plotting every detail. The office grew warmer, the faint rattle of rain against the glass, a steady rhythm in the background. Papers spread across the table like a battlefield map. Contracts highlighted in neon yellow, side-by-side comparisons of my original sketches and their stolen replicas. I traced the lines with my finger, the ink smudging faintly onto my skin. Each page felt like a stitch, pulling me back together, piece by piece. Sophia's voice guided us like a conductor. We'll control the narrative. Press kits prepped in advance. Interviews lined up. You don't just expose them. You rise from it. Do you understand? I swallowed, nodding. The thought of facing Alex and Louise in such a public arena twisted my stomach into knots, but the fire underneath pushed me forward. It was well past midnight when the city outside hushed into a softer hum, sirens echoing far away. Sophia stepped out to take a call, her heels clicking down the hallway, leaving me alone with the warm desk lamp and the mountain of evidence. That's when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up. Unknown number. My hand hovered. Then, with a deep breath, I swiped. At first there was only static, sharp and grating. Then a voice, low, distorted, as if dragged through water. "Watch your back. They're not alone." The words froze me. My grip tightened until the phone creaked. "Who is this?" My voice was louder than I intended, slicing through the quiet room. Silence. Then the line went dead. I stared at the screen, my pulse thundering in my ears. Not alone. The phrase coiled through me like smoke. Instantly I saw him. The man outside the cafe. The gaze that had cut straight into me. Was this about him? Or was something bigger at play? The door opened behind me. I jumped, nearly dropping the phone. Sophia stepped back in, her sharp eyes narrowing the moment she saw my face. "Emma, what happened?" I forced the words out, my throat dry. "Someone called. They said, 'Watch your back. They're not alone.'" Sophia's expression tightened. No dismissal, no comforting laugh, just a silence heavy with confirmation. Even she believed the threat was real. My hands trembled around the cold coffee mug. "Do you think it's Luis?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her answer was steady, deliberate. "It could be. Or someone else who doesn't want you anywhere near that runway." The weight of it pressed down harder than before. My instincts screamed to hide, to retreat into the shadows where no one could touch me. But then I thought of all they had taken. My studio, my savings, my dignity. If I backed down now, I'd be giving them the rest of me too. I steadied my breathing, forcing the tremor out of my voice. "Then we keep going. Whoever they are, whatever this means, I won't stop." Sophia studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Fear is what they want. Don't hand it to them." Still, when a truck rumbled past outside and the lights flickered across the window, my head snapped toward it, my heart leaping into my throat. The shadows looked longer, sharper. My chest tightened. Who was watching? And why warn me now? I gathered the folder to my chest, its weight both anchor and burden. As I stepped out into the damp Soho night, the rain had slowed to a mist, streetlights casting halos in the puddles. My reflection in the glass doors looked like a stranger, eyes wide, jaw tight, carrying both hope and dread in equal measure. The plan was set. The evidence was solid. But as I walked down the slick streets, paranoia trailed me like a second shadow. I was ready to fight, but I knew now I wasn't just fighting Alex and Luis. Someone else was in the dark, watching. Who's watching, and why warn me now? The days that followed blurred into one long investigation. Sophia's office became less of a workspace and more like a war room. Files stacked so high they threatened to topple. Sticky notes covered the walls, and the faint smell of ink and printer toner hung heavy in the air. My eyes burned from staring at screens, but every click, every scroll, peeled back another layer of lies. I leaned over the laptop, hands trembling as I opened an old email chain I had almost forgotten about. There it was, my sketches. The ones I had sent privately to a client, forwarded again from an unfamiliar address. Luis's name tagged at the bottom, pretending the work was his. I felt my chest tighten as I whispered aloud, "He really sold me out." Sophia stood behind me, her voice calm but edged with steel. "We'll catalog every one of these. The more patterns we show, the harder they'll fall." The lawyer across the table nodded, sliding another file toward me. "And there's more. Statements from former clients. Listen to this one." He adjusted his glasses, reading aloud. "They pitched us Emma's collection, but under Luis's name. I recognized her lines immediately. They said she was too unstable to handle business herself." My stomach dropped. So that's what they had been spreading. Not just stealing my work, but tarnishing me to justify it. Anger bubbled up sharp and hot. For so long, I had swallowed their comments, the little jabs about being a dreamer, the jokes about me not understanding money, and now I saw it clearly. Those weren't jokes. They were weapons. As the days stretched, a darker picture emerged. Credit card records showed Alex's gambling debts spiraling. Casinos lit up in neon statements. Luis's name came up again and again in financial disputes, each one dripping with arrogance and envy. Jealousy had festered in him for years, hidden behind his brotherly grin. Their motives stood naked before me. Luis's bitterness at my success, Alex's desperation to cover his losses. Together they had gutted me to feed their greed. Sophia broke the silence, her eyes meeting mine across the table. "Emma, this collection you're building, it won't just clear your name, it will be your rebirth." Her certainty steadied me. I turned toward the design table where bolts of fabric lay waiting, deep crimsons, icy silvers, midnight blues. My fingers traced their textures, rough against velvet, smooth over silk. Each piece became a symbol. Anger stitched into red, resilience woven into silver, rebirth shimmering in blue. For hours I sketched. My pencil scratched furiously across paper, fueled by fury and clarity. The designs poured out of me, bolder, sharper, unapologetic. Not gowns to please clients, not dresses for approval. These were weapons, armor for a woman who had been broken and was now rising. Sophia watched quietly, then said softly, "This is the Emma they never saw coming." I didn't answer. My chest was too tight, my throat too full. Instead, I pressed harder with the pencil, as if each stroke carved me back into existence. But amid the focus, small details gnawed at me. In the piles of financial documents, there were payments I couldn't place. Large sums that led back to an account not in Luis's or Alex's names. One file referenced family authorizations. Family. The word twisted in my gut. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding. "Sophia, this looks like someone else was involved." She leaned over, frowning as her eyes skimmed the line. "You think... your mother?" The thought pierced me. My mother had always been quiet, reserved, distant even. Could she have known? Could she have signed something? My father's letter came back to me. Luis hides more than he admits. But what if it wasn't just him? I shoved the paper aside, refusing to drown in questions I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. One battle at a time. The nights dragged on, but exhaustion couldn't keep me from the fire inside. Between conference calls with lawyers, I stitched prototypes, fabric stretching under my hands, needles biting into cloth, the hiss of the iron, the steady hum of the sewing machine. It all became a rhythm, a heartbeat of defiance. The evidence grew into a mountain. Emails cataloged, client testimonies notarized, contracts highlighted in neon yellow. Each page was another brick in the case that would topple Luis and Alex. And with every discovery, my designs grew fiercer. Sometimes I caught myself whispering under my breath, "Their jealousy fueled this. Now it's my turn." At the end of one long night, the conference room looked like a battlefield frozen mid-fight. Papers sprawled, coffee cups drained, fabrics draped across chairs like wounded soldiers. I stood at the window, the city glowing below me, the weight of preparation pressing against my spine. We were ready, or at least we thought we were, because beneath the certainty, beneath the sharpened anger and the stitched determination, that one unanswered question remained. If more of my family was involved, how deep did the betrayal go? As dawn painted the sky with pale light, Sophia closed the last folder and said, "It's time. Fashion Week is waiting." I nodded, my heart pounding not just with fear, but with something sharper. Resolve. The case was solid, the collection alive, the stakes higher than ever. But as I packed the designs into their bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't preparing for just one battle. Something bigger was moving in the shadows, and soon it would reveal itself. The night of Fashion Week was unlike anything I had ever stepped into before, even when I was at my best. The city glowed brighter than usual, drenched in neon, camera flashes bursting like fireworks as black cars lined the curb. My cab door opened, and the cool night air rushed in, carrying the mingled scent of perfume, asphalt, and rain that had just stopped falling. I stepped out, my midnight blue gown flowing like water, every inch of it chosen to remind me I was not broken. I was reborn. My hands shook slightly as I clutched the small envelope in my purse, but my back remained straight. Tonight was not about surviving. Tonight was about reclaiming. Inside, the hall was overwhelming, a palace of sound and light. Chandeliers dripped crystal sparks, neon beams cut through the air, and music pulsed from hidden speakers with a beat that mirrored my racing heart. Perfume, champagne, leather, and silk mixed into an intoxicating fog that hovered above the crowded room. Everyone looked perfect, but their smiles were daggers, sharp, shallow, and waiting to be turned. And then I saw them. Luis, with his booming laugh, already holding court in the center of a circle of investors, his hands slapping backs as if he owned the room. Alex stood at his side, perfectly groomed, flashing his charming smile like a weapon polished for this very night. Behind them, screens flashed designs, my gowns, my sketches, my soul, paraded under their name as if I had never existed. The sight was like a knife sliding under my ribs. I slipped into the shadows, watching, my pulse hammering in my ears. They didn't even flinch, didn't even hesitate, as they networked with the confidence of men convinced they were untouchable. Luis threw his head back, laughing at some crude joke. Alex leaned in close to a woman in diamonds, whispering something that made her blush. Their performance was flawless. And then Luis noticed me. For the briefest moment, his expression flickered, but instead of fear, he smirked. From the bouquet on a nearby table, he plucked a single white rose. A waiter carried it over and placed it in front of me. I froze, the stem cool against my fingertips, the petals too soft for what they meant, a taunt, a reminder. To him, I was still the naive sister, still the pawn who had handed him everything. I wanted to crush the rose between my fists. Instead, I let it rest on the table and forced my face to remain calm. Sophia leaned toward me, her perfume faintly floral, her voice a whisper sharp enough to cut glass. "They're clueless, Emma. They don't know what's coming." I nodded, though my chest ached. Hidden in my clutch was the evidence, the proof of theft, the contracts, the testimonies. But tonight wasn't about throwing it all at once. Tonight was about choosing the right moment, the strike that would shatter their armor in front of the world. An investor I recognized drifted closer, curiosity in his eyes. "Emma?" "Ah," he said carefully, his voice dipped with the weight of every rumor I had heard. "I thought you'd disappeared." I slipped a single page from the envelope and handed it to him without a word. His brows furrowed as he read. I watched the transformation ripple across his face. Shock, then disbelief, then sharp interest. He glanced toward Alex and Luis, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This changes everything." My pulse steadied for the first time all night. The first domino had tipped, and then I saw him. Near the far wall, half hidden behind a column, stood the man I had spotted weeks ago, the one whose gaze had burned through the cafe glass, whose shadow had haunted my steps. My stomach knotted, the rose sliding from my table onto the floor. Sophia caught my expression instantly. "It's okay," she murmured, placing a reassuring hand on mine. "That's not who you think. He's with me." I turned to her, wide-eyed. "What?" "He's a detective. I hired him after you told me about the man outside. He's been watching for your protection." Relief hit me like a tidal wave, my knees weak under the weight of it. All this time I had thought I was prey, being hunted through the city's shadows. The truth was stranger. I had been guarded. Still, the unease wouldn't fully leave me. If Sophia had needed to hire someone, then what had she been afraid of? Across the room, Alex lifted his glass, his voice booming over the music. "Our portfolio speaks for itself," he declared, his grin smug as cameras clicked. Glasses lifted in unison, laughter rising like smoke. I clenched my hands around my clutch. They had no idea. Not yet. The music swelled. Models began lining up for the runway, and the hall's energy shifted. Higher, faster, louder. The chandeliers glistened like ice, the crowd buzzing with the hunger for spectacle. The investor tucked the proof into his jacket pocket, his eyes glimmering with new knowledge. Sophia's detective shifted closer to the exit, his watchful eyes sweeping the crowd. And Luis and Alex laughed as if the night belonged to them. Inside me, anticipation flared, sharp and electric. I whispered inside my head, "They're clueless. Time to turn the tables." The crowd's chatter thickened as the lights dimmed. For a moment, everything hung suspended. The music's pause, the press's waiting cameras, the hall's breathless expectation. My pulse was so loud I swore it could be heard. I sat straighter, every muscle taut. Victory wasn't here yet, but I could feel it in the air, hovering just beyond the first runway step, waiting to break open like glass. And as the screens flickered to life again, showcasing designs that weren't theirs, I smiled. Not from joy, but from knowing the end of their game had already begun. The hall pulsed with anticipation, the kind of charged silence that crackled beneath the sound of clinking glasses and whispered speculation. Golden chandeliers dripped light across polished marble floors, and cameras circled like vultures, waiting for spectacle. I stood near the back, my gown brushing against my heels, my heartbeat a frantic drum in my ears. Luis took the stage first, his posture immaculate, his voice smooth like a practiced salesman. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, glass raised high, "thank you for being part of this celebration. Fashion is about vision, courage, and trust, and not everyone has what it takes." His pause was deliberate, his eyes flicking toward me like daggers. Some people lose their way. Some people break under pressure. The words hit me like a slap. Around me, heads turned, curious eyes narrowing in my direction. Alex stood at Luis's side, the perfect accomplice in a tailored suit, his smirk sharpened for the cameras. This was their game. Erase me, humiliate me, bury me before the truth could break free. My throat tightened, but fear burned into something sharper. Rage. I inhaled slowly, the scent of lilies from the floral arrangement stinging my nose, then stepped forward. My heels clicked against the runway floor, cutting through the murmurs until I stood under the full blaze of the lights. "All of you deserve the truth," I said, my voice steady though my pulse roared in my ears. "Because what they've told you tonight isn't courage, it's theft." The crowd froze, a wave of silence crashing through the hall. Spotlights swiveled toward me, illuminating every line of my face. My palms were slick against the small clicker Sophia had pressed into my hand earlier, but I forced my finger down. The giant screens flared to life behind us. One by one, my designs appeared. Sketches inked with my initials, prototypes photographed in my studio, digital files stamped with creation dates months before Louise and Alex had claimed them. "These," I said, pointing to the screen, "are mine. Every line, every detail. I created them. And these men, my brother Luis and the man I once loved, stole them." Gasps burst through the room. The images shifted again, cycling through emails, contracts, client testimonies. Each new slide was a hammer blow dismantling the empire they had built on lies. Alex laughed, the sound brittle. "This is desperation. Our portfolio speaks for itself." But before he could continue, an investor I had quietly approached earlier stood up, his voice like steel. "I've seen the evidence. These designs were never yours." The crowd erupted into sharp whispers and shouts. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Luis's confident grin cracked, his fingers twitching nervously at his side. I stepped closer, my voice dropping into the microphone, steady and cold. "It wasn't enough to steal my work, was it, Luis? You also stole from Dad. You hid his will." The screen behind me flickered once more, revealing a scanned letter in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Luis hides more than he admits. The silence that followed was deafening. A chill swept through the hall as the words sank in. Luis's face blanched. That's not real," he stammered, though his eyes betrayed him, darting everywhere but toward the page. "It's very real," I said, pulling the authenticated document from my folder and holding it high. "You concealed his instructions, his inheritance, everything he meant to leave behind. You betrayed me, not just as your sister, but as his daughter." The hall exploded. Gasps, outraged shouts. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised, the sound of cameras firing like gunshots. Every whisper was a blade slicing apart the lies they had spun for years. Alex's smirk evaporated, his practiced charm wilting under the weight of proof. For once, he stood speechless. And then, the wail of sirens split through the noise. Red and blue lights strobed against the walls as police officers entered, their boots striking hard against marble. Papers rustled in their hands, warrants prepared long before this night. Luis Alvarez, Alexander Kane. An officer's voice thundered across the hall. "You're under investigation for fraud, theft, and concealment of inheritance documents." Chaos erupted. Some guests gasped in horror, others cheered, and still others recorded the moment as if it were the finale of a drama they had paid to watch. Luis's eyes went wild, his mask shattering. He lunged toward me, his voice breaking. "You ruined everything!" I didn't flinch. My voice was clear, almost calm. "No, Luis, you did that yourself." Alex tried to slip quietly off the stage, but Sophia's detective was already waiting at the side exit. The man I had once mistaken for a stalker stood solid, unyielding, blocking Alex's path. The net had been cast, and now it was closing. The officers advanced, cuffs gleaming under the stage lights as they restrained Luis and Alex. Reporters shouted questions, flashes seared my eyes, and the crowd surged forward in a frenzy. And yet, in the middle of the chaos, I stood steady. The spotlight pressed hot against my skin, the sound of the crowd swelling into something almost like applause. For the first time in months, my chest ached not from despair, but from release. Finally, the truth sets me free. I close my eyes for a heartbeat, hearing the echo of my father's words, the ones I had doubted until tonight. The betrayal was out in the open, stripped of its disguise, and justice had arrived in handcuffs. But as Luis shouted curses over his shoulder and Alex kept his head low in defeat, I knew this wasn't the end. Truth had broken through the walls of deceit, but its aftershocks were only beginning. Somewhere in that crowd, I could still feel eyes locked on me, watchful, calculating, not all of them kind. The night ended in chaos, but I walked off the stage unbroken, the weight of vindication heavy in my hands and the fight for justice still burning in my veins. The world didn't wait. By sunrise, my story wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to everyone. News anchors dissected it with grave voices, fashion bloggers wrote threads that spread like wildfire, and strangers on TikTok set my words to music. The internet had turned betrayal into a battle cry. My phone trembled in my hand with every new headline: "Designer exposes family fraud," "Betrayal on the runway," "Sibling deception shocks fashion week." Clips of me standing on that stage looped endlessly. My voice, clear, resolute, declaring, "These designs are mine. They stole everything." It was surreal hearing my pain bounce back at me through millions of screens. And yet, instead of shame, I felt something else. Vindication. Messages poured in, thousands of comments from people I had never met. "You're brave." Finally, someone stood up to the thieves. "I went through this too. Thank you for speaking out." Their outrage carried me like a tide, louder than the whispers that had once called me unreliable. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone. Meanwhile, across the city, cameras caught the fallout in real time. Luis and Alex were led out of their apartments in handcuffs, the bright flash of photographers capturing every grimace. Luis still tried to sneer, his voice lost under the barrage of shouted questions. Alex's head hung low, the charm stripped from him like a mask torn away. Reporters crowded every step, their silence only making them look guiltier. I watched from Sophia's office, the video streaming live on her laptop. Relief rushed through me, but it was braided with something bitter. This was justice, yes, but it was also the end of my family as I had known it. I thought the collapse was complete. I thought the rot had been scraped away. But then my phone rang. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. Mom. Her voice trembled when I answered. "Emma, please, can we meet just once? I need to explain." Against every instinct screaming no, I said yes. Maybe because I still craved answers. Maybe because a small, bruised part of me still wanted a mother. We met in the garden behind her townhouse. The air smelled of wet roses and soil, heavy after the morning rain. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders curved inward, her hands twisting the hem of her cardigan. For a long time, she couldn't even look at me. "I had to see you," she whispered finally, her voice so thin it almost broke. "I had to tell you the truth." Her words came out in bursts, as though holding them had been a burden too heavy. "Luis came to me months ago. He said he needed help, that you wouldn't understand, that you'd stand in his way. He begged me to back him, to cover for him. And I gave him the papers, the ones your father left." The world tilted. "You what?" My voice cracked. "I thought if I gave them to him," she rushed on, tears welling in her eyes, "he'd finally settle. Stop gambling, stop lying. I thought I was protecting him." Her hands shook as she clasped mine, desperate. "I had to protect him. Forgive us. Forgive me." The garden buzzed with bees, their sound swelling until it filled my ears like a swarm. My stomach twisted. I saw her face, wet with tears, but behind it I saw years of the same pattern, her bending for Luis, excusing him, turning her silence into a weapon against me. "You knew about the will," I said slowly, each word like stone dropping into water. She nodded, choking on her sobs. "I thought I was saving him. Please understand." I pulled my hands back. The air between us turned colder. "You didn't save him. You armed him. You handed him the knife he used to stab me." Her tears fell freely now, but I couldn't move closer. Not anymore. She hadn't just failed me. She had chosen him. The betrayal was complete. My father's letter, Luis's greed, Alex's lies, and now my mother's complicity. Every thread knotted into the same truth. I had never been protected, only sacrificed. "I can't forgive you," I said, my voice low, steady despite the quake in my chest. "Not this time. Even you. Boundaries start now." Her sobs followed me as I walked away, the scent of roses cloying, almost suffocating. Each step felt like tearing free from invisible chains I had carried since childhood. Days later, the story only grew. News montages replayed my confrontation, but now they also replayed hers. Images of her, pale and distraught, exiting her townhouse under flashing cameras. Headlines screamed, "Mother tied to fraudulent will. Designer's family web of lies exposed." In Sophia's office, I stared at another headline. "From victim to victor. Designer turns betrayal into movement." My chest tightened, but this time with something closer to pride. Because I had made a decision. Betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but I wouldn't let it define me. I launched a victim fund in my father's name, a foundation for creatives who had been exploited, silenced, stripped of their work. Within hours, donations poured in. Notes arrived with them. For my daughter, who lost her music rights. For my brother cheated out of his art. For everyone who's ever been taken advantage of. Reading them, my throat ached with unshed tears. The ache inside me began to shift, not into joy yet, but into something steadier. Purpose. I knew the scars would never fade completely. The betrayal of blood is not a wound that heals clean. But as I stared at the glowing screen, at messages from strangers who saw me, believed me, stood with me, I knew I wasn't alone. Even Mom, especially Mom, had shown me the truth. Love without accountability wasn't love at all. So I chose a different inheritance. Not the money, not the land, not the power that had been twisted against me. My inheritance was resilience. The world knew the truth now. Justice had been served. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was free. 2 years later, the mornings in Brooklyn carry a different weight. Where once my days began with fear, they now begin with sunlight spilling across bay windows, gilding the polished wooden floors of my studio. The city outside hums with its usual rhythm, the rattle of delivery trucks on cobblestones, the faint clang of the subway beneath, the horns weaving into a discordant symphony. But inside, the soundtrack has changed. Here, the air is filled with the whir of sewing machines, the muted tap of keyboards, the hiss of steam irons pressing seams into place, and the occasional burst of laughter. It smells of coffee, cotton, and ambition. When I push open the glass doors each morning, I'm greeted not by silence, but by momentum. Stacks of fabric lean like colorful towers against the walls, mood boards crowd with sketches and swatches, and framed magazine covers remind me that the world no longer sees me as a cautionary tale, but as a comeback. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Elle. The same publications that once ignored my work now splash my designs across their pages. Each cover whispers the same truth. The ruins of betrayal became the ground where I rebuilt. This brand isn't just business, it's a reclamation. It's proof that the ashes didn't consume me. And more than the fame, more than the runways, what I cherish most now is the mentorship. Every Friday afternoon, I gather my team of young designers in what we call the vault. It isn't glamorous, just whiteboards cluttered with scribbled notes, shelves packed with binders labeled contracts, copyrights, safeguards. But this room holds power. It's where I teach them the lessons I had to learn the hard way. How to copyright every sketch, how to track revisions, how to read contracts with suspicion, and how to say no when opportunities reek of exploitation. The sessions always begin the same way. I let the silence stretch, notebooks clutch tightly in nervous hands, until I ask, "What scared you this week?" The answers come. Hesitant at first, a client demanding free work, a friend asking to borrow designs, a partner pressuring for creative control. Each story cuts, familiar and raw, but I hold steady. I want them to leave with armor, not wounds. One afternoon, a young woman's voice trembled as she asked, "But what if it's someone you love? A brother? A mother?" The room stilled. I felt my chest tighten, memories pressing hard against my ribs. For a moment, I almost faltered, but then I met her eyes and spoke slowly, deliberately. "Then it matters even more. Document everything. Trust but verify, because love should never be used as leverage against you." Pens scratched across paper as they wrote it down like law. For them, it was guidance. For me, it was survival. The truth is, forgiving myself took longer than exposing them ever did. Justice had been served, but I still woke from dreams where Luis's laugh taunted me, where Alex's empty promises echoed, where my mother's voice whispered I had to protect him. Victories in courtrooms and headlines didn't erase those echoes. Some nights they still slip into the quiet, but somewhere in the rebuilding, I discovered something essential. Survival doesn't mean your scars vanish, it means you learn to walk with them anyway. I came to see boundaries differently, not as walls to lock people out, but as gates to protect respect, to let the right ones in. Now, as I move through the studio, watching designers fit garments onto mannequins, I don't just see fabric or stitches. I see proof that ruin wasn't my ending. Proof that betrayal didn't define me. What I built afterward did. Some evenings, when the city hums outside and the last streaks of sunset spill gold across the floor, I pause by the window. The air smells faintly of warm fabric and fresh ink from the printers. I whisper to myself, from ruins to empire, boundaries made it possible. My father's words still echo. Luis hides more than he admits. Once, that line haunted me like a curse. Now it's a compass. Ignored warnings become wounds. Honored boundaries become freedom. The collection we prepare now embodies that truth. Fabrics shimmer like survival itself, silks that shift in light. Cuts fall like armor, yet move with grace. Each piece is a declaration, every seam a story stitched with resilience. When models wear these designs, they carry more than clothes. They carry testimony. Luis and Alex are gone from this world of fashion, bound by sentences they can't escape. My mother lives in silence, her absence heavier than any apology. But I don't carry their weight anymore. Their choices are theirs. My freedom is mine. And now, I turn to you. Maybe you've felt betrayal too. Maybe someone you trusted cut deeper than any stranger could. Maybe your scars still ache and your trust feels fragile. Hear me. Betrayal does not define you. Resilience does. Boundaries are not weakness. They are your greatest strength. They protect your future without erasing your past. So I ask you now, are you ready to draw your own lines? If my story speaks to you, like and subscribe for more tales of resilience. Comment boundaries if you're setting yours. And share your story, because every time we speak the truth, betrayal loses its grip. We are not only the wounds they gave us, we are the architects of our own empires.